Hello, my loves, and welcome once again to Strange Playgrounds. Those of you who are paying attention to such things might know that there was a very recent adaptation of not only one of my favourite horror novels, but also one of the texts of horror science fiction, arguably of literature itself, certainly here in the West, in the UK. That is, of course, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus. That book is, for me, one of the most beautiful pieces of horror ever created, and also one of the most profound. It deals with so many ideas and concepts, and in such a transgressive and deviant manner when you look at it contextually, when you look at when it was written and who it was written by. I mean, it's an amazing work. Mary Shelley outshines so many of her male contemporaries in terms of how she writes and how deeply she writes, how incisively. She was a genius. I mean, she was a stone cold genius. She saw things in the human condition that nobody around her did. And she explored and expressed them in such a beautiful manner. I mean, one of the things that you often see with texts like Frankenstein is that people assume they know what it's about, but there is a prescribed assumption of what it's about in culture, which is either skewed, misapprehended, or entirely wrong. And that's certainly the case for Frankenstein. People generally tend to assume that Frankenstein is primarily a kind of didactic text that's warning against humanity delving too deep into areas that it's not supposed to, in a sort of Lovecraftian way. That it's about almost like original sin. It's about humanity transgressing into God's territory and creating life and blah blah blah. It's not that element is there. It's not about that. That is certainly an element of it. I mean, she's expressing something that's happening within 19th century culture in the UK, and that is the escalation of scientific understanding and exploration, which is increasingly pushing back traditional narratives. It's pushing back religious prescriptions and narratives to the margins of culture, and that's what she's exploring to a certain degree. But that isn't primarily what the text is about. It isn't most overtly what the text is about. When you actually sit down and read the book, which is, by the way, profoundly removed from the vast majority of adaptations, like cinema adaptations that exist out there. That's not to say, by the way, that the cinema adaptations don't have things going for them in and of themselves. Those Universal adaptations, the classic Universal adaptations with Bela Lugosi, not Bela Lugosi, that's Dracula, isn't it? Boris Karloff, obviously, as the monster. They are far removed from the original text, but they have their own merits and elements. The Bride of Frankenstein is particularly brilliant. There is a version of Frankenstein with Christopher Lee as the monster as well, a very early Hammer version. But what you tend to find, not only are they removed from the original text, but the understanding of what the text is about tends to be removed from the original text. So one of the things Shelley massively emphasizes within the book, within the novel, is that it's about the tensions and the politics between creators and the created. And that expands out to myriad contexts. So it's both the notion of a creator in a religious or metaphysical or existential sense, so as in the tensions between God and man, but it's also about the tensions between parents and children. It is primarily and very overtly, very starkly about what happens when our parents, our creators, turn out to be profoundly disappointing. In the book, in the original novel, Victor Frankenstein is despite the text being primarily written from his perspective, he is very antagonistic. He is not the hero of this text, nor is he sort of like a misunderstood anti hero or anything like that. He is a bastard. He's a bad guy. And the monster by contrast, is without a doubt painted as a victim in the story. He is a victim by nature of his existence. The monster doesn't ask to exist in the same way that children don't ask to exist, right? That's what Shelley is talking about. It's about the right to enforce consciousness on another entity for your own interests or for your own gains. She is, I mean, this is a 19th century, very young woman operating in a very conservative, very traditionalist culture, very prescriptive, daring to say, do do you have the right to even have children? Are you good enough? Are you good enough? Do you have the right to bring consciousness into being? That's kind of what she's asking. And the text is unambiguous in that it's no. No, we are not. We absolutely are not. We are so fallen, we are so corrupt, we are so damaged that we can not but inflict that damage upon that which we create, no matter how pure it is. I mean, one of the subtexts of, it's very subtle in the original novel, but it's certainly there, is that the monster is somehow purer than humanity. It doesn't have the baggage of humanity because of the nature of its creation. It is a new entity and is therefore shorn of things like, in the traditional parlance, things like original sin, which is kind of interesting. That's kind of fascinating. It makes the monster purer than, and he expresses this. The monster in, apart from, or rather in contrast to the vast majority of the adaptations, the monster is a person. That's the irony, barring its aesthetics, and it is pretty goddamn hideous in the novel. It's even more hideous in the novel than in the vast majority of the adaptations. Actually, it doesn't look like the Boris Karloff version. It looks like what it is. It looks like a patchwork man. It's a gigantic figure, not very well stitched together from various bits and pieces of other people. It is ghastly to look upon. But it's only aesthetics. In terms of the way it is eloquent, it is clever, it is emotionally attuned and in touch with itself. That Victor is not, interestingly. Victor Frankenstein is not. Victor Frankenstein is, he operates in a state of confusion and delusion all the way through. He doesn't know what he wants. That's part of the irony. So, like, when he succeeds in what he considers to be his life's work, his life's ambition, he doesn't want it. He rejects it. It's cruel and it's unusual and it's twisted and bizarre, and the monster thereby reflects his sins back upon him. Um, it's again Shelley looking at children and parents, and how children reflect the sins of their parents back upon them. It really is a case of love of the child is the measure of the parent, right? That's kind of the watchword of the modern Prometheus, of Frankenstein. Now, this adaptation by Guillermo del Toro. Now, generally speaking, I really like del Toro's work. I quite like. I respond to del Toro's work really quite powerfully. I love Pan's Labyrinth. I absolutely adore. The Devil's Backbone, beautiful, absolutely beautiful. A lot of his other work as well, I really, really enjoy. I really liked that adaptation of Pinocchio that we had recently, again via Netflix. That adaptation of Carlo Collodi's original text was the closest to the original text that we've had. In terms of tone and timbre and imagery, I really liked it. I really enjoyed that adaptation. I mean, I like the Disney one as well. I like the 1940s is Pinocchio, I believe so. That I love. I think it's a far cry from Carlo Collodi's original text, by the way. In the original text, Pinocchio is not an innocent. In the original text, Pinocchio is like a fucking demon. He's almost sent to torment Geppetto for daring to ask for what he can't have, There's a real nasty didactic element to it. The living puppet in Carlo Collodi's original work, drives Geppetto to absolute distraction. It torments him. It's a really dark text, actually, and he's like a spirit of abandon, in the same way that Peter Pan is in J.M. Barrie's original text. It's kind of interesting. This version of Frankenstein is interesting, but I think massively, massively flawed. It's sort of a hot mess. I really like Guillermo's work for the most part. As I say, here, I'm not sure that his style of direction and of imagery is correct, you know. The thing about Frankenstein is it's held up as one of the great works of Gothic horror, and that's true, it is one of the great works of Gothic horror, but it's actually highly unusual amongst the annals of Gothic horror in the sense that it doesn't really have the text anyway. The original the adaptations and the films do, but the actual text does not have the big classic Gothic imagery or subjects. It doesn't have the big castles. It doesn't have the overblown and overwrought melodrama. The original text is really quiet and subtle and primarily preoccupied with conversations and language. The vast, vast majority of the text is people having conversations or retrospectively having conversations. You know, as was the style of the time. It's a journalistic text, so it's assembled from various different pieces of journals and Victor Frankenstein's confessions and things like that. But it is primarily concerned with communication. It's people sitting down and talking. There's a great sequence, actually, which, I'm actually quite surprised is not in this adaptation, but which I would say is key to understanding the text and its tensions, where Victor has been chasing the monster for ages, for a long, long time. And eventually, he catches up with him, or rather, the monster just allows himself to be caught. Well, actually, the monster catches Victor, but that's by the by. And they have a conversation. The monster is incredibly articulate and eloquent, and he speaks beautifully and expresses himself to Victor. He asks him, "Why, my creator? Why did you make me? Of what am I comprised? And how did you do it? How did you create me? And what are you to me? What am I?" That's what he's looking for ultimately, in the way that children do. He is looking to his parent figure for purpose and poetry and meaning in his existence, and he's not getting it. He's not getting it. Because Frankenstein ultimately created this monster, this creation, this miracle arbitrarily to see if he could, right? And that is really the darkness of this text, because it really dares to say, you know what? Most of the time, despite the narratives that parents retrospectively apply to themselves, the truth is most parents have children arbitrarily too. They don't really consider it. They don't consider the ramifications of what they're doing, because if they did, they wouldn't do it, would they? They wouldn't, if you could think about it for 2 seconds, do you have the right to enforce consciousness on anyone, on anything? Of course you don't. Of course you don't. It's the ultimate imposition. It's the ultimate violence in a way. It's the ultimate trauma. You do not have that right. You do not have that right. From that original trauma, all other traumas follow, right? And that's what the text is getting at. There's a kind of misanthropy and nihilism inherent in the text, and it's really interesting. It's really fascinating. The monster is purer than its creator. The monster is a better entity, a more worthwhile entity than its creator, and it responds in the only way it can, which is with fury, with violence, and it doesn't do it arbitrarily. It's in control of its emotions. It tells Frankenstein, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's something like, "I have capacity for love, the like of which you can't even imagine, and also of rage. And if I cannot satisfy the one, I will indulge the other." Right? That's what it tells Frankenstein. It is so in touch with its own humanity, with its innate humanity. It's assembled from human parts. It is more human than human. It's like the purest manifestation of humanity in many respects. And Frankenstein, its father, its creator, ruins it. It ruins it. But that conversation isn't in this adaptation. And that I find that quite baffling. I find that quite baffling because that conversation is absolutely key. And in many other ways, this adaptation is kind of slavish to the original text. It follows the original text relatively closely. It changes and adapts a couple of things. For example, Elizabeth is not Frankenstein's adopted sister and later fiance, maybe for obvious reasons. There's a couple of other extra characters in it, like he has a benefactor who funds his research and so on, ably played by Christoph Waltz. As Christoph Waltz is fucking amazing and everything. Obviously, one thing I will, the cast is amazing in general. Actually, the cast and the production are absolutely incredible, and the acting is great. What turned me off from it was I found that the ideas, which are generally interesting, they're innate to the original text, and what Del Toro has done is teased them out. Basically, he's made them more overt. I found that they played second fiddle to the production, to the spectacle, to the aesthetics. I found the aesthetics of this film really distracting and kind of inappropriate. I don't think they worked. Introducing all of this ornate, over embellished Gothicism, and of course, then introducing on top of that sort of horror and violence set pieces, it kind of didn't work for me. I found that element to be incredibly distracting from otherwise kind of interesting stuff. So the ideas, which of course, I mean, like any adaptation of this story, unless it makes a real hash of it, is always going to be interesting because it's all about its ideas. It's all about its ideas. That one of the things it does is it shifts emphasis from Victor to the monster. So whatever human elements, whatever identifiable and sympathetic qualities Victor has in the original novel are basically gone. There aren't many in the original novel, but they're basically gone here. And Victor is a prick. He is a gigantic, narcissistic, ego-driven prick in this story, which he is in the original text as well. That's absolutely true. He is in the original text. But you get more of the interiority and complexity of Victor in the original text. Here, he is just that. There is little else to him, to be perfectly honest. Whereas the monster is very complex and very multi-layered and interesting, much more childlike at the beginning than it is in the original novel. The original novel is very interesting, and this is an element that this text cuts out as well. In the original novel, the monster asks him things like, how do I know how to do this? Like the monster can play instruments and it can read and it learns to do things, but it's like it remembers things, and it asks Victor, what parts of my body does this knowledge reside in? Because I know how to do things that I shouldn't know how to do. I learn very quickly. And he does. He learns very quickly. And that's part of like the existential quandary of the original novel. He's comprised of various parts of different people. So where does the knowledge reside? You know, where does knowledge and skill and craft and understanding reside? That's another existential question of the original novel, but that's cut out too of this version. The monster is much more childlike at the beginning, which actually I kind of like. I find that really interesting because Victor has chance to develop something of a paternalistic relationship with the monster. But I find the transition too quick. He starts acting like his father, and it's very explicit that the relationship between him and his father isn't very good. Whereas in the original text, it is. That actually isn't a thing in the original text. In this version, his father, again, another great bit of casting, Charles Dance, brilliant, is a prick. He's an abusive prick to Victor. And that is what, it's exploring again that tension between parents and children. So, Victor's father was a prick to him, therefore he's a prick to his creation, his child, as it were. But I found it a little bit too simplistic and too broadly drawn. I didn't really buy the way that Victor turned on his own creation in this version. In the original, he sees it. In the original novel, he sees it and that's it. He has this incredible revelation, which is so profound, it actually knocks him unconscious. He's in a fever, like a delirium, for weeks after seeing the monster, in which his thought processes and state of mind are rearranging themselves, and he's coming to understand the magnitude of what he's done. Here it takes a little bit more time, and it doesn't ring true for me. It's like Victor can't understand the utter fucking miracle of what he's done, despite the fact that he expresses understanding of that miracle before it's actually manifested. I found that difficult. I found that difficult to work with for me. Um, I would have liked more. I mean, the monster is great. By the way, the performance is fantastic, as is the performance of Victor himself. It's just the script is a little bit too rushed and a little bit too obsessed with getting to the big set pieces rather than taking its time. It's all a bit too vast and grand guignol and too gothic for its own good. I mean, don't get me wrong, some of the gothic elements are really fun. They're really fun. The original text doesn't have the big castle or laboratory or the electrodes or the lightning or anything like that. You don't even know, in the original text, you don't even know how he does it. It doesn't explain how he does it. It just talks about how he comes to understand the spark of life, and then he creates the monster, and it's like it's transitional. Like within the space of a page turn, he's created the monster, and you don't know how he did it. You have no idea how he did it. Here, they've taken, Del Toro has taken elements from the Universal pictures and the previous versions of Frankenstein with the lightning and the electrodes and all of that stuff, the flipping of the switches, the "it's alive" moments, oh God, now I know what it feels like to be God. That's from the original Universal Frankenstein, and it's a line that's usually cut out of most versions of it, actually, because of the blasphemy element. That element is there in this version, and it's kind of fun. It's kind of cool. As an aesthetic exercise, it's actually a really pretty film. It really is beautiful. Everything is really well done. But I found that it was a bit like, ironically, it's a bit like another film which is directly inspired by Frankenstein, which is the Prometheus, the Prometheus, the alien film Prometheus, directed by Ridley Scott. Which you all know my feelings on that one. This has similar problems. Interestingly, this has similar problems. I'm not as hostile to this one as I am to Prometheus. Um, it's because this one isn't so much up its own arse as Prometheus is. This one is not as pretentious. You can get away, this film can get away with not delving too deep into its own ideas and just operating as a kind of really fun action horror film. It kind of works on that level. But I do find, as a fan of the original text and understanding what it's referencing, I found myself wanting it to be quieter, to be slower, to be less big and operatic and grand, and for it to just take it down several notches. I wanted more conversation, more stillness. I wanted more of a languid approach to the subject matter, more of a cerebral approach to the subject matter than what it gave. And that's not really a commentary on the film itself, because it depends on what you want from it, really. I wanted something different from an adaptation of this material. I'll be perfectly honest. I wanted something different. It's not my favorite adaptation by any measure. By any measure. I found it fun, but not deeply engaging, and at times mildly frustrating or mildly perturbing when it was just rushing through its ideas and not giving them time to swell and to develop and to become what they kind of want to be, what they ache to be. Yeah, it is not. It's not 100% successful. I think it's diverting. I think it's aesthetically interesting, and directorially, I think it's interesting. And I think it's, in terms of production, you can't really argue with it. Everything is really well done. But it does have issues. And I mean, I know one of the things people who know the text and the context of the original text are really gonna take against, because I took against it as well. It ends with a quote from Byron. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Byron's poetry. Lord Byron's poetry is absolutely beautiful. I'm a romantic at heart, and I always have been. But he was a prick to Shelley. He was a bad dude. I mean, they were contemporaries, and yeah, he was a bad guy to Shelley in many, many respects. So it does feel a little disrespectful to Shelley to end with a quote from Byron and not from the original text, you know? Why not end with a quote from Shelley? It feels odd. That it does feel very, very peculiar, that one. So yeah, a bit of a disappointment for me, this one. I was expecting more. I thought that, Del Toro was a good pick by and large for this subject matter. I thought he might have he might have given it a good showing, but it's not my favorite adaptation of this material by any stretch or measure. And I would definitely advise people go and seek out some of the other adaptations, which are less close to the original text but interesting in and of themselves.